Welcome to Taming Disaster with Drones for Good podcast, presented by Aeros, part of GE Aviation, with additional financial support from First Eyes and Pix4D. Tune in for in-depth interviews, one-of-a-kind perspectives, and insightful conversations with industry leaders who are using drones to help prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters around the world. And now, from the Airt Studios in Miami, Florida, the heart of Hurricane Alley, here is your host, Christopher Todd.
All right, welcome to another edition of Taming Disaster Drones for Good. I'm Chris, and I will be your host for the next 40 minutes or so as we explore how unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, also known as drones, are making a difference around the world and in your neighborhood, helping to save lives and protect property. One of the areas where drones have really shown their potential is with helping to prepare for, respond to, and recover from severe tropical storms and hurricanes. 2017 really proved to be a benchmark year as UAS responded to hurricanes Harvey in Texas, Irma here in Florida, and Maria on the island of Puerto Rico. We saw many stakeholders using UAS for a wide range of missions, including search and rescue, damage assessment, power restoration, and insurance claims. With 2018 arrival of Hurricanes Florence in the Carolinas and Michael in the Florida Panhandle, and Hurricane Dorian in the northern Bahamas in 2019, drone operations continue to show amazing potential by offering a quick, cost-effective, aviation-based capability for many response elements. And as if emergency managers don't have enough on their plate with the COVID-19 pandemic, and what appears to be the makings of an above-average wildfire season, June 1st also marked the start of the 2020 hurricane season. When it comes to hurricanes, the state of Florida sits front and center as the U.S. gateway from Hurricane Alley, which is why I am extremely excited about our guest today, a man who has led teams and operated UAS in the aftermath of several hurricanes across both Texas and Florida, and serves as the director as one of the leading programs developing UAS for use in disaster management. He also serves as the UAS coordinator in the Air Operations Branch for the Florida Department of Emergency Management. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with distinct pleasure that I welcome the Director of the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program and Center for Disaster Risk Policy at Florida State University, Mr. David Merrick. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
So you're up in Tallahassee with your finger on the proverbial pulse of UAS operations in the state of Florida. I want to learn all about what Florida has planned for the 2020 hurricane season. But first, let's back up a bit. I would love to learn about how you first started experimenting with robotic technology and how you started flying drones. Where did this all begin?
So back in 2012, we started kind of talking about how, there's 67 counties in Florida. The vast majority of them do not have a big emergency management budget. And one of the things that we never have enough of in any disaster is aviation resources or resources in general. So I think we were sitting around having lunch and had read an article about someone doing mapping well, I can't remember what they were mapping, but mapping using a drone, right? So flying some sort of quadcopter and capturing imagery, and then turning that into a map. And that kind of lunchtime conversation started with, hey, that's pretty nifty. It can't be that expensive. And we started kind of batting around these ideas about how these counties that can't afford to operate a helicopter, the sheriff's office isn't a helicopter, fire rescue doesn't have one. And then, what could we do with drones in a disaster? What's realistic? What would work? What wouldn't? So that led us to building a couple, kind of as a proof of concept, right? This was,
and this was before DJI Phantom came out,
yeah.
or right? Okay.
We built our first one before the Phantom came out. When the Phantom 1 originally hit the market, we're like, oh, this is pretty nifty. We can do a lot of things, but we could actually do more with our home built at the time using, the open source mission planner software and, Pixhawk or APM autopilots. We could actually do that mapping. And that led us to our first, major project, which was in Haiti in 2013, where we used a quadcopter running APM to map some rural areas that had zero resources for disaster management, and then we're actually able to create digital elevation models and apply surge modeling to that, and so demonstrate to these communities what was at risk and what wasn't. And we did that with stuff that literally showed up to us in Ziploc baggies, and that we put together. So
that's really interesting. So unlike a lot of people who had been kind of, model rocketers or involved in the amateur aviation clubs, you kind of were already involved in emergency management and disasters and saw this new tool and said, this is a great tool we can incorporate to get some situational awareness and intelligence from the air. Is that fair to say?
That is exactly correct. So, all of my team, all my faculty are emergency managers first, and we've kind of tripped and fell into this whole UAS thing in the past 7 or 8 years. And I first started learning to fly manned aircraft in 1989, and one of my other faculty members was prior service and Air Force officer and flew on B-52s. So we have an appreciation of aviation, but this was in a lot of ways an accident that got us started.
And what were some of the challenges? I mean, I think when we look at it today, we've got a lot of different flight management software programs. You've got Pix4D and different programs where you can stitch together the imagery. But what were you using back in 2012 for this?
So in 2012, there was some open source stuff that was a nightmare. In 2013, we actually had Pix4D, whatever they called their product at that point, and then Agisoft PhotoScan Pro, which is what Metashape was known as back then. And that's actually what we used in Haiti originally to build those orthos and those digital elevation models. But when you ask what the challenges were, the answer is everything. Everything was a challenge. Mission planning was a challenge. Flight times were on our quadcopters, 10 minutes. 11 on a good day, and there was no nifty battery monitors. You launched and started a stopwatch, watched your battery voltages, and kind of just did the best you could. So there were a ton of challenges, right? Everything these days is so much nicer from a software and a processing standpoint and everything else.
Yeah, I think in the last 8 years, we've seen, with Moore's Law, the way, it's really meant for transistors and microchips, but we're seeing the duplication rate and the advancement rate of the technology just accelerate.
Right.
I can't even imagine, 2012, what it must have been like. I mean, I get frustrated today, on seeing half the time trying to put some of these pieces together, but you really were out there in kind of the tip of the iceberg when this was starting to emerge as a viable option.
Yep.
Any advice for other program managers who might be getting into the disaster management side today and looking at building a program as to where a good starting point might be?
So start two starting pieces, right? Go simple, right? Keep it simple, stupid. Particularly at the beginning, it's very easy to have big dreams, big appetite. And bite off more than you can chew. So, the smaller aircraft, the low-hanging fruit that doesn't require a lot of post-processing and things like that, they can give you great results on a variety of different types of public safety or EM missions without having to sink a lot of cost into processing Pix4D or GIS support or all that. So that's the first piece of advice. Second piece of advice, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Right. So if you're looking at a budget and your choice is 1 fancy aircraft or 2 not so fancy aircrafts, go with option 2. Get the 2 of everything because trust me, you're going to break it or ding it or it's not going to work right. And if you don't have a second one, then you're kind of dead in the water there and you won't be able to complete that mission.
That's a really interesting point because I think a lot of people, when they're looking at building a program, they're wondering, do I need a quadcopter? Do I need a fixed wing, a hybrid? Kind of what is the nature of the mission I'm going to be embarking on? But you're basically saying, start smart and 2 is 1, 1 is none, and make sure you have that redundancy. And I got to tell you, I agree with that. There's been so many times I'm out in the field and the smallest snag will either delay or ground you for the day just because some unforeseen firmware update or a piece of equipment malfunctioning that you didn't really envision. Have you had those experiences in the field, obviously?
Oh, definitely. They don't let me really work on equipment anymore. So yeah, if I start to get if something's not working right, they'll usually just take it away from me and hand me one that is working. That's usually the way to go. And it varies. Going back to Haiti in 2013, and we're working off of things that were shipped to us in Ziploc baggies and soldered together by us. And we spent a lot of time sitting on the ground with a laptop troubleshooting things in the middle of nowhere, trying to get everything to work right every day. And that hasn't gone away, right? So we've got all this fancier equipment, from fixed wings to the big quads and the hexes now, and there is not a activation, be that a real world event or a training exercise, where something doesn't work right on any given day. So if you don't have a backup for that, that's not great.
Yep. So, something really interesting that kind of, took me, I should say not took me by surprise, but I just thought it was fascinating. Listening to you speak at the National Public Safety UAS conference in Crozet a couple months ago, you mentioned in your presentation that one of your favorite drones was the Parrot DISCO. And can you tell us a little bit about why that is and why you tend to favor that particular aircraft?
Sure. So the Parrot DISCO it's a fixed wing, pusher prop configuration, flying wing, and it was put out by Parrot 2 or 3 years ago as a consumer grade fun thing, right? That's all it does. It's got a digitally stabilized HD camera in the nose, so as the aircraft is banking and rolling, the video is stabilized. Keeps you from creating a lot of motion sickness. But it's very simple, right? It's one prop, one moving part, right? The other advantage of that digitally stabilized camera is there's no gimbal in there. There's no motors. It's very robust. And I know because we've hit a lot of things with it, but, so, one moving part or three, I'm sorry, the prop and the two, flapper on servos. That's it. You can get it out of the vehicle, assembled and airborne in about 5 minutes. And then it gives you between 40 and 45 minutes of time in the air where it's getting really nice HD footage. It's fast, and it's got really good range, all things considered. So we can cover. It is my favorite reconnaissance aircraft. So we can get that in the air quickly. We can record a lot of imagery about what the situation on the ground is, and relatively simple to fly. Right, the autopilot in it keeps even novice pilots from making your typical fixed wing mistakes. It won't let you overroll or overbank. It won't let you stall. All that. So it's easy to teach people how to use. It's easy to operate, and it can cover a lot of ground faster than most multi-rotors. So yeah, that's and we use that to we've used it in a lot of cases for search and rescue, as well as it was our primary reconnaissance bird for Hurricane Michael on Mexico Beach and then in Panama City.
That's really interesting. And I'm sure a lot of people out there are kind of scrambling online right now to see what the pricing is on a Parrot DISCO and where they can find them. I believe Parrot actually quit manufacturing that aircraft, but last time I checked, there were a few available on Amazon.com and some other sites. Did you have some spare parts in stock just in case at this point?
Yes. So when we heard they were going to discontinue it, and they did, it's been a couple of years now. We had 2 aircraft already, but we purchased a lot of spare wings and props and everything else, and those parts have actually lasted us very well. We've since modified one of those aircraft and put a Garmin Verb camera in the belly in a nadir position, so we're capturing video off the nose and still imagery on a 3-second intervalometer out of the belly. So get the spare parts. I have seen them on Amazon. I've seen them on eBay.
Okay. All right. So those of you outside who want to check into the Parrot DISCO, good luck and happy hunting. Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about Florida State University. It seems like emergency management and homeland security programs are starting to appear at many academic institutions around the country. Tell me a little bit about how you first got involved with FSU and about the program you've created over there.
So I'll start with the program. We started teaching emergency management classes in 1997. So, pre 9/11, pre kind of this explosion in EM and Homeland Security programs. And that has grown steadily. And a lot of that came out of the fact that the Center for Disaster Risk Policy, which is our applied research center, was staffed entirely by emergency managers, and we have for a couple of decades now done a lot of applied work for local, state, and government agency or federal agencies. So, from plan development to program assessment to training, exercising, all of that has been done over the years, and it kind of developed out of, hey, we have all this expertise. Why don't we teach classes in it too? Since here we are at FSU. So that started in '97, and it's grown quite a bit since then. Right, we've gone from 2 classes in 1997 to we have about 26 classes in the catalog now, and went from 3 faculty to 9 faculty over that period of time. So it's been a lot of growth there, and it's been really satisfying to kind of being one of the original programs in emergency management on the academic side.
So the UAS portion of the program, is that within the emergency management program, or is that part of the Center for Disaster and Risk Policy?
Sure. So the UAS program is part of the emergency management Homeland Security program, right? So we offer certificates and at the undergraduate and graduate level through there. And unlike a lot of other schools that are there, and there's quite a few that are teaching unmanned systems, our classes focus entirely on how we use drones in emergency management and public safety, right? So we're focused heavily on the disasters and the law enforcement and the fire uses.
Okay. And, I got to give a quick shout out to you too. I had one of your graduates working for me on the airborne response side last hurricane season, Taylor Crutchfield. And the big reason we brought her on board was because of the knowledge and education she had from Florida State University. And she kind of was a seamless integration into what we needed for hurricane season. So she had great things to say about the program, and just a quick shout out. I mean, she was exceptional. So, keep up the good work. It's nice to see the caliber of the students coming out of that program and what their capabilities are.
Glad to hear it.
And for anyone who wants more information on that program, the URL is em.fsu.edu. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. So learn more about the Florida State University Emergency Management Program online at em.fsu.edu. I know you and your team have a really robust portfolio of disaster deployments with drones. Can you walk us through some of the most memorable incidents you've responded to, and maybe what some of the key takeaways from those missions were?
Sure. So, as you're aware, Florida had a hurricane drought for about 11 years, right? From 2005 to 2016, we didn't have any landfalling hurricanes in the state. And that's kind of where we started all this, going back to 2012, 2013, looking at that. So we started really talking to our friends in DEM about how we can put drones to use in disasters. In 2014 and 2015, we exercised that in the statewide hurricane exercise in 2015. And then we kind of got the opportunity to kick the tires on that concept in 2016 when Hurricane Matthew went up the east coast of the state. Never flew a drone. We were part of the urban search and rescue teams that went out. And frankly, there was no need. And second of all, when we hit Flagler County and we're over there with Florida Task Force 8, winds on the ground were still at 50, 55 miles an hour. Anyway, so we weren't going to be flying anything in that weather, but the planning worked. And more importantly, the coordination with the FAA was spot on, right? We were able to get the emergency COAs for airspace, and we were able to get an emergency COA to fly at night, and all these things we were able to do in 2016 very, very quickly while we were moving from our staging area to where we were going to be. So it was a proof of concept when it came to integration at the state level, as well as how we're going to coordinate with the FAA. And that model is carried out, in the 4 years since then. So, really kind of our two biggest, most interesting deployments, and we've done every hurricane in the state since then. were Hurricane Michael in 2018. So we were originally sent to Walton County. Was our initial mission from the state. So we went to Walton County. We helped them write their SAR plan, their post-impact search and rescue plan, coordinated that with the county as well as with the independent fire districts there. Turns out it wasn't needed, right? We did an afternoon of quick reconnaissance when the storm made landfall, and it was quickly determined that Walton County was not. We'd gotten the fringe of it, but for the most part, it was fine. And we were able to determine this with very technical means. It's the fact when you show up at the beaches in Sandestin and there's people walking their dogs at landfall +3, then you know that this is not. Everything's fine. Power's out in places, but it was not that big of a deal. The state sent us to Bay County the next day on the 11th, which is the day after landfall. And when we got to the Bay County Emergency Operations Center, their initial ask was we have no idea how bad things are down on Mexico Beach, and they had sent other resources to Panama City Beach because there was the same question mark there. So we moved south that morning, and we did we brought them back their first imagery of Mexico Beach, which is kind of ironic in a lot of ways because it was the afternoon it was Thursday afternoon before the county emergency operations center and all the people in it that were making decisions in the county. It was our imagery that was the first thing they had seen. Everyone else in the country had pretty much already seen what had happened on Mexico Beach because news media had already flown through and manned and unmanned aircraft and shot a lot of footage and then got that out through the satellite services. And so if you weren't in the impact area, you were able to see that imagery. When we were in the impact area, however, nothing worked. There was no internet, There was no phones, there was no radios, there was nothing. So went out, took a bunch of imagery and brought that back. And it taught us a lot of things about how to do that recon as quickly as possible in an environment where you don't have any communications, which we've been preaching that as emergency manager for 15 years, that, all this LTE 3G stuff wasn't going to work when the next big one showed up, and it kind of got laughed at, and now everyone believes us. So yay, none of that's going to work. So that was good. We also did a lot of work with Florida Task Force 2 using FLIR to clear rubble piles, which was the big issue, right? Because there was an unknown number of missing people on Mexico Beach. Turns out the number was much lower than we anticipated. But a lot of lessons learned there, again, regarding integration with the state, with their operations at the state, as well as with the local resources on the ground. And then the other interesting one was also from 2018, earlier that year. We deployed as part of a task force from CRASAR, the Center for Robot Assisted Search and Rescue, to work the Lower Puna volcanic event, which was the Kilauea eruption in 2018. So we spent 8 days there until we did some mapping, but we also were in direct support of Hawaii County Fire and Hilo Fire for their operations on the ground, and as well as supported the USGS until their UAS teams could arrive in from the mainland. So, and that was interesting. Again, from an airspace coordination standpoint, the FAA was fantastic. There was a TFR over the entire area, which means at night when we were doing a lot of our flying, because the helicopters weren't operating, they cleared us up to 1,000 feet inside that TFR, which was fascinating. You can go a really long way at night with good strobes at 1,000 feet and maintain line of sight. So we were able to cover a lot of ground every night as far as mapping and reconnaissance and everything else. So, and then again, that was the first time I'd ever worked a volcano, either with UAS or not. And it was a really interesting situation there from a long start. The last point I want to make about Hawaii is it really did illustrate the difference between an emergency manager who flies drones and someone who flies drones and happens to find themselves standing in the middle of a disaster. There was a very different mindset between when my team went out and what we were trying to accomplish and who we were working for and what kind of products we were trying to get versus folks who have a drone, were local to the area, and were just in, yes, there's a disaster. How can I help? Right. There's a very different mindset regarding integration, communication, coordination, all of those types of things. And that's really kind of something that we emphasize in all of our teachings, both our academic classes as well as our professional trainings, as far as how do you integrate safely with manned aviation, with ground resources, with the incident command system, everything else, so that you can do what you need to do as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
So many great points there. I was up in the Panhandle as well for Hurricane Michael, and yeah, the point of we trained with all of these apps and all this fancy technology under a persistent internet connection, and the minute that's gone and you don't have a network, you're really at the mercy of how much planning you did on the forefront. Did you cache some maps? Do you have a flight plan? Do you have a backup plan for how you're going to get the imagery from point A to point B? I think that was a real wake-up call for those of us who were up there. And it really is something that people need to take into consideration. I mean, these operations are about so much more than just operating the aircraft. You've got to have a soup to nuts plan on what you're going to collect, where you're going to collect it, as far as imagery, and how you're going to get the data to the end user who actually needs to make decisions with it. And the point you made about the coordination between professional emergency management folks and those who are kind of out there probably trying to do good, but without that same level of ICS training is really important. That's something I think we'll delve into here in another couple minutes. Okay, so you recently responded to a wildfire in the Florida Panhandle. Can you tell us a little bit about your mission there and what were the outcomes?
Sure. So we responded to the Musset Bayou fire in South Walton County. And again, that request came through Walton County Emergency Management. So we sent 3 people the initial request was to map the damage area, right? So again, we had 2 fires working in the Panhandle. There was the Santa Rosa, the 5 Mile Swamp Fire in Santa Rosa County, and then there was the Musset Bayou fire. And of course, we're back down to limited resources, particularly on the aviation side of things. The Musset Bayou fire was much smaller in size. It was only about 350 acres, whereas the 5 Mile Swamp Fire had exceeded 1,000 acres. So as you can imagine, a lot of the aviation resources were being put onto the Swamp Fire. And so the request came out. It's like, hey, we know where the fire went through, and it started overnight on a Wednesday night and really rolled through those 350 acres overnight Wednesday. We got there Thursday morning. It was about 65% contained when we got there. So the EM ask was, can we map this? We know we've got about 90 structures that were impacted, at least 30 that were destroyed. Let's map that. So we said, sure, we can definitely do that. We used the EBX, the fixed wing EBX with the SOTA 3D sensor was going to be our go-to. We had a great kind of centralized area to fly from, local park, good line of sight, long way in each direction. So we split that into 2 sorties, a south sortie and a north sortie, so that we could keep the bird in view. And flew 2 flights that were about 45 to 50 minutes each, gathered about 2,000 photos, and then had that stitched and put together for Walton County that afternoon. So they had that pretty quick. And then we started talking to South Walton Fire Rescue as well as Florida Forestry Service about how we could use FLIR imagery to map where hotspots were, right? Because 65% contained. There was still a lot of question marks about in the kind of the middle of the fire area, where is it? And then the question started to come up about how there was going to be a wind shift. The wind had been primarily from out of the northwest. The wind was going to shift from the south, which meant if back where the fire originated on the north part of the fire, if there was a lot of unidentified hotspots up there and that wind shifts from the south, it could then be blowing into unburned area, right? And trying to get out of the black. And so that became the question. And Florida Forestry had they had an OH-58 helicopter working that scene. He was not doing water drops on Thursday or Friday, but he was working and looking, and as well as fixed wing observation aircraft doing that. But we were really unable to determine where those hotspots were. So until we put a relatively simple aircraft to work, right? The Mavic 2 Enterprise Dual. We flew at night because, again, the firefighting aircraft don't fly at night. So that was a great and simple way to coordinate who's got the airspace. We did a lot of sitting around while the Forest Service aircraft were overhead because we don't fly when they were. But at night it was free and clear, and we would go out and fly in the burned area, looking for those hotspots, and they were very, very easy to find at night with the FLIR. And very simple integration. I've got a Forest Service, wildland firefighter standing next to me with a map. He's directing me where to go inside the burn area. We'd fly, we'd see, we record latitude and longitude. He'd mark it on the map. We move to the next one. And that information would then go into their planning meetings and let them kind of formulate their plan of attack for the next day and set those priorities about what needs to be done to increase that containment. So very simple.
So that's pretty interesting. So you were calling out the lat and lon of the aircraft to basically mark the hotspot.
Correct.
And then the forestry. Okay. Obviously, as technology is expanding, we're trying to get to that point where we can drop pins on those spots, and those are coming. But, that's a really easy, smart way, I think, to mark those hotspots. And a lot of folks might not even consider that, it can be done in such a simplistic format.
And I'll be honest, I mean, he had his paper map. We'd give him the latitude and longitude, and we were recording those, and we actually created a web map for them with those hotspots, so they could add that as a layer into their system overnight. But, the paper map was, let's compare what's on your paper map to what I'm seeing on the pilot display. And we'll just kind of circle that area. So sometimes simple is fine, and simple works. Yes. And we've used software where we can drop pins. And one of the things we've been working at for a while is how to integrate ATAC or CivTAC into all of this, which, is made for that. We'll get there. But in the meantime, hood of a truck, paper map and a pencil and a flashlight did the trick.
I'm a big believer in the KISS principle.
That's right.
Keep it simple, stupid. Perfect. Well, switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about COVID-19 briefly. There's been a reasonable amount of commotion over the past 2 months about the use of drones in helping to battle the pandemic. What are your thoughts on the use of unmanned aircraft systems in helping to combat infectious disease in general and COVID-19 specifically? I mean, is there something to it?
I've seen one use case that I like when it comes to drones and modern equipment and COVID-19, and that was I can't remember where it was. I think it was New York, where they put a M210 and a XT2 on the counter in front as part of the entry procedures, and we're simply using the FLIR camera to take surface temperatures of people as they walk through the checkpoint, right? No props, not armed, not flying. It was just the FLIR camera. That is the only use case I've seen that I really think is viable, cost-effective, safe, appropriate, a variety of things there, right? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about using the Mavic 2 enterprise line with its speakers and, use that for monitoring crowds. There's been talk about how to use the FLIR camera to measure people's temperatures from a distance. So many problems with all of that. One, no one's going to like the idea of a drone flying overhead, monitoring what they're doing in the crowd. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that idea. It's a PR nightmare. It probably does more damage to ongoing drone operations than anything else, right? We've already seen backlash on this with members of Congress, writing letters and talking about uses of drones in a negative light. In regards to COVID, that's not ideal. Not to mention the fact from a technical standpoint, the FLIR sensors, even the XT2 on an M210 or whatever, is not going to give you accurate enough readings at distance that you can do that. And I've also seen specially made drones that will do spray disinfectants over like arenas. Okay. I've seen one that's got UVC lights on it so you can fly it through a doctor's office. I just ask, why a drone for any of that? If I'm going to walk through an arena and spray air disinfectant, just use a hose. If I'm going to, hit a doctor's office with UVC lights, then just, put it in a wand and walk through it and kill all that. Why add the layer of complexity and expense and everything else? So,
no argument there. I mean, I think a lot of these use cases have come off as a bit gimmicky, to say the least. I get it. Tech companies are looking for ways to differentiate their product in a marketplace that is increasingly competitive. But Probably not the best use for some of these use cases. And, I think we're learning that the hard way. And it may have kind of set the public safety sector back a little bit. One of the key concerns we established through the drone responders program research is that one of the top 3 needs for public safety drone programs is to garner positive community acceptance of the use of these systems. And the perceptions that were created through some of these, I'm not sure really served that in a positive way. So, well, let's talk about something that I think is close to both of our hearts, and that's hurricanes. Hurricane is a fascinating storm, and unless you've really experienced one firsthand and seen the aftermath of a strong Category 3 or greater, I think it's hard to truly appreciate the ferocity and power of these events. I grew up in Wisconsin. I had a pretty good handle on tornadoes and tornado season, but it wasn't until I moved down here to Florida shortly after Hurricane Andrew crushed southern Miami-Dade County that I really realized the damage these storms were capable of. This year, experts from Colorado State University are predicting 16 named tropical storms with 8 becoming hurricanes. They're saying there's a 69% chance for at least one major hurricane with sustained winds of 111 miles per hour or greater to make landfall along U.S. shores. What are your thoughts on this year's forecast? Should we be worried?
We should always be worried, and I do that without even looking at what the forecast says. Right? There's a forecast every year. Some years they're spot on. Some years they're not. Right? So you're saying 16 named storms is the forecast in 2020. A pretty high percentage chance of a landfalling hurricane, a major hurricane. My response is the same as it always is. It only takes one. It only takes one storm, right? Andrew was the first storm of that season, and it stood as the most powerful hurricane to impact the U.S. For a long time. So, getting kind of bogged down in the worry of, is it 14 storms, is it 16 storms? Doesn't matter. It's the one storm that I'm worried about. And probability is not, it's not cumulative. Right. So just because you get that one storm early in the season that hits doesn't mean there won't be one later in the season as well. So yes, we should be worried, and we should continue to prepare like we do every year to make sure that both our individuals and our citizens and stakeholders, as well as our agencies, are ready to go.
So in regards to preparation, you serve as the statewide UAS coordinator in the Air Operations Branch for the Florida Department of Emergency Management. Is Florida ready to respond to a major hurricane landfall with drones? And if so, what does that plan look like?
We are. I think we're actually in a better position, particularly in regards to drones, than the vast majority of states or territories. Florida has spent 5 years integrating unmanned systems into air operations. It's now just kind of an accepted part of the way that we're going to do things, right? And there's a lot of understanding there. I can't. The UAS side is not going to move logistics, right? We're not going to move a USAR team into the Keys, and we're not going to deliver pallets of water, and that's perfectly fine. At the same time, though, we can do a lot of things that manned aircraft can't do, including fly in weather that's below minimums or marginal. We can be typically more agile if we're embedded with ground resources, and I'll talk about that in a second. There's no having to talk to the pilot or talk to someone who can talk to the pilot to relay those things through, because a lot of times the operator is standing right there. So we plan for how we split the airspace up, right? We're one of the few states that has a standing airspace management plan, kind of a template for where unmanned aircraft systems are going to operate. And we split that horizontally by altitude, so that, typically surface to 200 is going to be the area for the drones, and then everything else is above that. So the fact that that's in there, that we've exercised together, we've deployed for 4 years this way, puts us, I think, ahead of the curve quite a bit. And then further, we have our UAS teams, including my team, embedded with urban search and rescue teams, right? We're part of that planning process in ESF 4 and 9, as well as in air operations, about how we can put that to work. And then again, from the reconnaissance side of things, how do we we've got experience in using drones in recon, which led us to something relatively new during Dorian, which devastated the Bahamas last year, but just kind of skimmed the east coast of Florida. But we embedded a UAS team in with the USAR Rapid Needs Assessment team, right? So that how to kind of enhance that ability and how we could quickly determine what's been impacted and what's not. And, from luck of the draw, Dorian turned north and we got only, relatively minor damage here in the state, but we were certainly ready for it. And I'm sure we're ready to repeat that again here in the 2020 season.
I think the great thing about hurricanes, as far as disasters go, is we typically have a little bit of advance notice and an increasingly more accurate forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Potential downside to that is you get a lot of people also seeing where that hurricane's going to go, and they want to come down with their drones from other parts of the country, probably with the best intentions, some commercial, some disaster tourism, if you want to call it that. Any advice you have for those folks on what you'd like to see from them if they're thinking of coming to Florida when they see a hurricane coming our way?
Yeah, very simple. Reach out to Volunteer Florida or ESF 15. We've already, we learned that lesson from Harvey. So my team was there in Fort Bend County. Lots of unmanned aircraft everywhere that were kind of uncoordinated. We brought that back as we prepped for Urma a few weeks later, and got with ESF 15 and with Volunteer Florida. And just like anybody else who comes to the state and wants to volunteer, either to run a chainsaw team or feeding or whatever else, Volunteer Florida is ready to accept those people and mark them down as a UAS resource. And that will then get you into the pipeline and coordinated by myself or someone in my team who can get you where where you're qualified to go, where you can safely go, and put that resource to work just like anything else.
Speaking of the qualification side, I know you've been really kind of spearheading the effort to develop resource typing for regional all hazards teams that will be deployable for disasters here in Florida. Where does that kind of stand to date as far as typing out UAS resources?
Well, we've got a really good idea of what we want to get done. The challenge remains getting that last mile finished, right? So we've got so FEMA started with resource typing a couple of years ago, as far as looking at what a small UAS team should look like, as well as typing the personnel as far as a pilot and a data manager or data person, right? And we kind of expanded on that here in the state. And we're working again through the urban search and rescue side of things, which of course are very strongly typed, right? And make sure that we know exactly what everyone has, and looking at how to build these teams in a way that is they're self-sufficient, and then they can achieve the mission as efficiently as possible, right? We don't want to send a lot of people when a fewer number will work. And what that led us to is we have a mission ready package, an MRP that's ready to go, which is a fancy way to say, here's an Excel spreadsheet that lists everything that should be on a team, and including the personnel as well as all of that. So we're there. COVID really slowed us down, right? We had got some approvals in January and February. We were going to exercise that in March, and then finish that typing process up, and then everyone kind of hit the brakes, and everything non-essential came to a stop. So we'll see. As soon as we can get back out on the field and validate some of these ideas, then we'll hopefully get that concept finished and build that first model regional team here in the state.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I don't think we've fully all come to terms with the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to have in different facets of UAS operations. Charles Werner and I were talking about that in the last episode, about how so many municipalities and government entities are going to see their budgets decrease due to costs associated with the COVID response, and that's going to have a trickle-down effect into unmanned aviation. Obviously, I mean, here in Florida, it's going to be no different. Do you think that's going to open up a new opportunity for external vendors and service providers to get in the game, or where do you see that gap kind of being filled?
That's a great question, and yeah, I think we're going to see a shift somewhat. I don't know of any agency's budget that's going to be the same in the next fiscal year as it was this year. Right? We've already, even internally in my shop, we've kind of frozen everything as is, and we're going to wait to see how this falls out. Which means we won't be experimenting with any new technology probably for the next calendar year at least before we can do that. And I expect there's going to be a lot of places here in Florida that are feeling the same pinch, especially considering the level of the state and localities depend upon sales taxes and bed taxes and a variety of other things to fund things. So that's going to be an issue. So that does open up the opportunity for outside parties and NGOs and corporations and a bunch of other things to provide those services. And that's going to come down to how do we do reimbursement, as it always is. And I am hearing some rumblings out of FEMA that might be loosening up slightly this year because of COVID. Again, because if we can do damage assessment remotely without putting people in the field, maybe we should be doing that. So we'll see where that goes, but that's that could be a positive aspect of things for the industry as a whole.
Exciting times. As we start to wrap this up, I wanted to ask you, beyond 2020 and beyond COVID-19 and beyond this hurricane season, what do you see the future holding for UAS operations here in Florida in regards to disaster operations and emergency management?
So really what I would love to get to is the point where the drone flies itself, right? I've always told people the flying is the easy part. And we focused a long time on, and we still teach people how to fly drones. We teach college students, we teach professionals how to do it, all that. That's great. I think we're going to see more and more shifts to how do we put those payloads and the data to work, right? How do we integrate that data and that intelligence into decision making? So that's that's our first step. And then eventually we're going to get to the point where this is pretty much all automated and accepted and no more exciting than the latest cell phone in some ways. And that'll be great, right? Because then we've got all this technology out there. We can generate all this information and hopefully make better decisions from small disasters to the next Andrew.
I agree. I've been telling people that we're going to look back on all this someday, and this line of sight radio controlled flying we're doing today is going to be a lot like dialing into AOL in the 90s to check your email. It's just going to be a whole different experience at some point. David, any closing thoughts or anything else you want to add into the conversation before we wrap it up?
Just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think Florida is primed and ready to go if we need to for anything from the flood to the next hurricane, and just happy to be part of the team.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard from David Merrick, Director of the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program and Center for Disaster Risk Policy at Florida State University, as well as the UAS Coordinator for the Florida Department of Emergency Management. Learn more about the FSU program online at em.fsu.edu. Once again, that's em.fsu.edu. David, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
And I'm Christopher Todd. Thank you for tuning in. Join us next time for another edition of Taming Disaster, Drones for Good.
Thank you for listening to Taming Disaster, a production of AIRT, the world's leading nonprofit organization supporting drones for good. Learn more about us online at airt.ngo. And be sure to tune in to our public safety focused podcast, Drone Responders, hosted by Charles Werner.